I'd like to call the Thursday, December 3rd, 2020 Papillion City Council meeting to order. Ms. Brown, would you please take the roll?
Sunday. Mumgard. Ames. Glover. Jaworski. Klug. Stube. Engberg.
Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Thank you. And do we have an affidavit of publication on file?
We do.
And a current copy of the Open Meetings Act is posted in the back of the council chambers. Do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Motion by Councilman Stube. Second by Councilman Gaines. Any council discussion? Please vote. Motion passes. Next is item C1. Ordinance 1911, an ordinance to amend Papillion Municipal Code, Chapter 125, entitled Health and Sanitation, to add new sections 125.11 through 125.23 to enact requirements for the wearing of facial coverings under certain circumstances so as to abate the COVID-19 pandemic and to provide for an effective date. Is there a motion to approve Ordinance 1911? Motion by Councilman Glover, second by Councilman Jaworski. There's been a series of amendments, I think, that are going to come forth. If I understand it right, I think 6, unless somebody brings one up during the meeting. The order we'll go ahead and take them is the order that the sections flow in the ordinance. I think it'd be the most logical. And so I'll lead off with what I believe the motion is that one of the council members wants. If that's appropriate for that council member, then they can make the motion and we can get the second. If there's a second, we will go ahead and have the discussion and a vote on that amendment. And then we'll move on to the next one. If one does not get a motion or a second, then we'll just move on to the next. So the first one, a motion to amend section 1 of ordinance 1911 to remove subsections 125.11A6 and 125.11A7, which read as follows. 6, the spread and treatment of COVID-19 and caused a serious and dangerous shortage of medical bed staffing and other resources. 7, COVID-19 constitutes a public nuisance and a threat to the public safety and welfare of the city of Papillion. So the intent of the motion is to strike those two. Is there a council member that make a motion? Motion by Councilman Sunday. Is there a second? Typically, we need to have discussion. If we get a motion in a second, then we can have the discussion, I believe, is appropriate. Is that right? Okay. Is there a second? Second by Councilman Mumgard. Council discussion, Mr. Sunday. Can you turn your microphone on, please?
With respect to subsection 6 that labels this COVID-19 virus as, or excuse me, sub 6, which says that we have a serious and dangerous shortage of medical beds. I've been watching the hospital occupancy rates every day since we've been talking about this. And right now, today, we're at 79% occupancy. The national average for metropolitan hospitals before COVID was 76%. We're at 79%. The average since June of this year has been above 80%. And I've followed it very closely. I've got a graph here. I know you don't like my graphs, but they're not my graphs. They're the health department's graphs. And it's been steadily above 80% since June. And now we're at 79%. So I do not believe that subparagraph 6 here is even a truthful statement. So if you vote for this, you're going to be attaching your good name to a lie. So I don't want it in there. That's why I don't want number 6 in there. Number 7 talks about public nuisance. I know something a little bit about what a public nuisance is. It traditionally in the common law has to do with somebody's misuse of their land or property that offends the neighbors somehow or injures the neighbors somehow. This is a stretch of what a public nuisance is, but has anybody considered, and we can ask Carla Risco about this here in a minute, has anybody here considered that if the city declares this virus to be a public nuisance, we are opening up the city to lawsuits against the city for unnecessarily bringing people into risk of what we've already admitted is a public nuisance? Because you should know that half the battle of a lawsuit for under public nuisance doctrine is proving that it's a public nuisance in the first place. But the city would be doing that for any litigant by declaring it so. So you are exposing the taxpayers, if you vote for this, you're exposing the taxpayers of Papillion to millions of dollars of lawsuits, potentially. I don't think any of us want that for our city. And I do not think we should be labeling this as a public nuisance because it is not. It's a virus. It's not a person. It's not property. It's a virus. And Carla, if you'd like to speak to that point, I'd appreciate it.
Councilmember Sunday makes an interesting point, and I think there is some legal validity to the concerns about declaring something to be a public nuisance, which then puts some obligations on the city. My recommendation would be that that language, public nuisance, is not necessary, and it's not actually consistent with the state law that gives us the authority to pass this ordinance. The state law, which is 16-238, states that a city of the first class may make regulations to prevent the introduction and spread of contagious, infectious, or malignant diseases into the city. I would recommend taking public nuisance out and switching it with contagious and infectious disease, so that it would read COVID-19 constitutes a contagious and infectious disease and a threat to the health, safety, and welfare of the city of Papillion. One thing that I would point out is, as far as constitutionality of an ordinance like this, I think there's some very good support that an ordinance, a face mask ordinance in the time of a pandemic would be found constitutional under both our state Supreme Court and the United States Supreme Court. And I have found case law from both of those courts that have supported in the past other ordinances that have been passed by cities facing epidemics and contagious disease. However, one of the requirements for it to be constitutional is that there is in fact a threat to the health, safety, and welfare of the city. So leaving that language in, I think, is important. But I would agree that the reference to a public nuisance is not necessary, would be better served, that we would be better served by changing it to contagious and infectious disease. And that would eliminate any threats, as Mr. Sunday, Councilmember Sunday pointed out, of possible litigation on finding something as a nuisance.
Thank you. Anything else, Mr. Sunday?
No.
Okay, thank you. If you could turn your mic off. Thank you. Mr. Stubbe.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I would ask Mr. Sunday if he would consider in number 7, maybe just striking 4 words. A public nuisance and.
Yes, that would be acceptable. I think that would relieve a lot of the potential exposure that the city would be taking on to itself if it left the words public nuisance in there. Yes.
Well, for number 6, I'm a little worried about that one because we may not have a dangerous shortage of beds, but staffing, there is a dangerous shortage of staffing. They're wore out. So that to me has to stay. Medical beds, we can let that go. Resources, they're dangerously low too. I have a daughter that is a nurse and I talk to her daily and she's tired. They're all tired. So I don't want to see that coming out, the staffing, because they're tired. Thanks.
Mr. Mumgarde.
Well, okay, I agree with part of what's been said, and I will make a substitute motion to amend the amendment to strike current section 6 or paragraph, whatever, sentence 6. I find that sentence really, whether it's true or not, it's irrelevant, doesn't need to be there. Get it out of there. And then modify section 7 so that it reads COVID-19 constitutes a threat to the health, safety, and welfare of the city of Papillion.
I'll second that substitute motion. I can support that.
Okay, so just to be clear, and I want to go slowly so everybody's on the same page. So the substitute motion, and I just checked my Roberts rule with the attorney too on substitute motion. So we got a substitute motion, which will basically replace the original motion that you made. It will strike 6. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. 6
And
would
it'll,
be-
and for, so what will remain is 7, but it will switch the public nuisance to the contagious and infectious. Is that what you, was that the intent?
No, I'm going to go with Mr. Stubbe's language. COVID-19 constitutes a threat to the health,
Yep.
safety, and welfare. We don't need to explain why. It just is.
So 2 strikes, strike 6 and strike a public nuisance and.
A public nuisance and,
Is that the intent of the motion?
yes.
You still have the second, Mr. Sunday?
Yes.
Okay, we have a motion and a second for a substitute. Any more discussion? I think I cut you off earlier, Mr. Stubbe. Do you have anything else? Okay. All right, please vote on the substitute motion.
Six yeas, 2 nays by Jaworski and Gaines.
So the motion passes. So the next one is a motion to amend the minimum age required to wear a mask from 5 years old to 10 years old and remove the sentence from subsection 125-16A2, which provides guidance for children age 3 and 4. Is there a councilman that make a motion? Motion by Councilman Sunday. Second by Councilman Mumgarde. Discussion. Mr. Sunday.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've heard a lot of testimony over the last couple of days from people that discussed, and I don't want people to misinterpret me as being in favor of this mask mandate, because no matter what happens, I'm not. But I think requiring 5-year-olds to wear masks is a little bit silly. And 10s, and I have to admit, I came up with this number arbitrarily. It seemed like a reasonable number to me. If somebody disagrees and thinks it should be a different number, I'm okay with that. If it's close to 10. But I thought small children are developing. They need to be able to develop as children and not walk around with their faces covered all the time. They're not at risk really from this disease. They're not big spreaders of this disease anyway. We know that to be true. Dr. Fauci just said it the other day. So what are we doing by requiring 5-year-olds to wear masks out in public? So that's why I'm making this motion.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Mr. Gaines.
Yeah, I think that some of the testimony that we heard here, from my recollection, Dr. Fauci said that they weren't super spreaders. And not that they couldn't spread the disease. Some of the other testimony that we heard was from the school, who was begging for our help so that we can slow the spread in the community, so we can slow the spread in the school. So what purpose does it provide us if these 7, 8, 9-year-olds are in school and with masks on, which is a mandate of the school system, then they come into the community and they don't have to wear masks anymore. So I'm going to make a substitute motion to change that age from 5 to 6, because I believe that's the school age children. And I think that is in line with the school system is asking us to do as a community.
So we'll stay consistent with the way we handled the previous one. So we do have a substitute motion. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Mumgarde. So discussion on that. The substitute motion would be to change it to 6, age 6. Discussion. Mr. Stubbe.
Yeah, so I guess I'll just go with what my experience is. I've got a 5-year-old grandson that goes to all-day kindergarten, and he's not in the Papillion La Vista School District, he's in the Miller School District, but he's required to wear a mask, and he wears a mask all day long. And sometimes my daughter tells me when he gets in the car, he's got his mask on. So I'm okay with 5 years of age as being the age that, because that's consistent with the school district that's in the Millard area. Whether that's the age for Papillion La Vista, I'm not really sure, and I guess I would defer to somebody else. With regard to kids getting COVID, I've got a 3-year-old grandson notified today. He's got COVID. Got it from his mom. And I've got a 9-month-old granddaughter that they believe she has COVID. Now, granted, they're not going to be wearing masks because hopefully they'll be staying home. But to me, it's a situation where kids can get it. And I've got experience with it. So I'm proposing to leave it where it is at 5 years of age.
Mr. Sunday. Oh, I messed the microphone cue up. We'll jump to Mr. Ingberg and then we'll come back. Mr. Ingberg.
Well, I partly concur with Mr. Game. It wouldn't make sense to go to 10 when, the school, we heard testimony from the school, what their goals have been and their success rate with it, but they do need our help. It makes sense to me, though, I won't vote for 6 because if I remember correctly, the school is operating at 5 years of age and up. If I remember correctly, if someone remembers differently, please let me know. But I think it's important we dovetail with what the school is doing, not only to assist them, but also to make it somewhat simpler. And I, like Mr. Stubbe, have some experience with someone that's 8. We've had several occasions where we've had to, he and his father had to quarantine because of kids in his class that had COVID and actually spread it. So I think it's important that we keep this in place and at 5 years of age and be done with it.
Mr. Gaines.
Yeah, after hearing Mr. Ingberg, I believe he is correct. So I'm going to withdraw my substitute motion and just let Mr. Sunday's motion stand on the floor.
So we withdrew a substitute motion, which then would leave the original motion to amend. So we're back to the discussion on 10. Mr. Sunday.
What Dr. Fauci said was, besides saying that they're not super spreaders, is that they handle it quite well. And as far as I know, and somebody here can correct me if I'm wrong, this is how many people under the age of 19 in the Omaha area that have died from COVID-19. That's 0. So let's not be afraid if one of our children gets this disease. It's a disease, yes, but our children are well equipped to deal with it. And there's no guarantees in life, no matter what you think. There's no guarantees in life. God is in control, and we are not. And I think that's an important point to make. I think our children deserve to be children. And if they have to wear a mask at school all day because the school says they must in order to go to school, that's the school's decision. There's nothing anybody in this body can do about that. But we can control what happens in our community. And if our children can't go maskless out in our community and they can't go maskless out in school, that means they can only be maskless at home. When are they going to do their human interaction and develop their human interaction skills and develop empathy for fellow human beings and grow up and be children? We are not allowing that to happen. And I think it's just a travesty. So I would urge everybody to rethink this. It's not asking a lot to raise this age to 10. Just because you want to stay consistent is not a good enough reason to sentence small children to that kind of onerous handicap for no reason. That's all I have.
Mr. Mumgarde, I want to make sure we follow intent. You had made the motion you had made the second on the substitute. Are you okay with the withdrawal? Okay, all right. Should have done that before. Mr. Sunday, can you turn your mic off? Ms. Klug.
Thank you. The 10-year age, I hear what you're saying about the concerns of kids seeing faces. I understand the social impacts of building the empathy in that. I think we're losing sight of the fact that this is not meant to be something that's going to last a lifetime. This is not something that's supposed to be here for months and months. And I know when we originally started this, we thought we were flattening the curve in a short amount of time. The virus has proved to be a little bit stronger than that, quite a bit stronger than that. So is it going to be years? I don't believe so. I think our science is coming along, not as fast as we would want, but I think it's coming along. And I do think that having it start at the age as originally written, leaving it at age 5 is very acceptable because our kids are going to be coming out of the masks just like we are.
Mr. Gaines.
So, I don't dispute, Mr. Sunday, the fact that children tolerate this well. Obviously, I haven't been here the last 2 meetings because people in my home had COVID. One of those was a child, and she got over it just fine. The issue, and I think that this is where people that I've talked to, people that have emailed me, I mean, I was on the phone for 4 hours today with people. And the issue is not the children getting sick. The issue is not me getting sick. The issue is them spreading it to other vulnerable citizens around the community. And there's no proof that a 5-year-old cannot spread the virus. And that's where I stand on it. I think we're forgetting that we're trying to prevent the spread, not prevent children from getting sick, who we know that, they get sick, they get immunity to it, and they move on. And I understand how, the immune system works, but that's the concept, is not spreading it to more vulnerable people. And last night I listened to I believe it's Dr. Quimby, correct me if I'm wrong, but we start looking at the mortality rates of older people, and that's who we're trying to protect, in my mind, with this ordinance.
Mr. Glover.
So can you tell me the cities around us that have already approved this, where their age limit sets?
It's just my opinion, but I believe Omaha, Ralston, La Vista, and Gretna are all 5 years old, I believe. That would need to be validated, but I believe that's the case. Hold on one second. Sarah Schramm is actually, we've got her on Zoom. Sarah is the Sarpy CAS Health Director. Sarah, would you want to weigh in on that question if you heard it?
Yes, Mayor Black, you are correct. La Vista is 5 years of age and Gretna is as well too. And I am pretty positive that Omaha and Ralston is as well too, but since they're not in our jurisdiction, I don't have as close of contact with those actual ordinances.
Appreciate that.
I'm going to wholeheartedly agree with what Mr. Gaines said. He's correctly identified that we should focus on the purpose of this ordinance. And the purpose of this ordinance is to stop the spread, stop infections. If, as many people have pointed out, if children under 5 or under 10 can get infected, then clearly they can spread it to people like you, like me, like their grandparents. So let's focus on our purpose. And secondly, for matters of consistency, the surrounding cities have 5, whether they're right, whether they're wrong, doesn't make any difference. The confusion and the additional disruption that would be caused by having some different rules here than just up the street is just not worth it. So I say stay with the consistency of the schools, stay with the consistency of surrounding cities, stay with 5.
You want to make one side comment. One, I want to thank everybody in chambers. It's been very quiet, been professional. We've had good decorum, and we appreciate that. If people talk or cheer, I put a quick stop to that, so we respect whoever's talking, whatever side. So greatly appreciate that. We do have overflow rooms, and I want to remind people those are an extension of this meeting. So if you're in an overflow room, please honor that and respect the others as well. Thank you, Mr. Ingberg.
I just want to briefly say I concur with Mr. Gaines and also with Mr. Mumgard in the fact that, let's not be flip about it. If we have to watch out for others. Yes, I know children, their death rate is as high as somebody my age. Yes, I know children many times handle it very well. But on the other hand, when my 8-year-old grandson has COVID, that does affect people in other households like me, when it put me at risk if we don't take some measures because my age, I'm in the high risk, and my wife, who's 8 years younger, is at extremely high risk. So, you know, we need to look out, as Mr. Gaines properly pointed out. It isn't so much about that. It's a temporary measure to help try and stop spreading to other individuals.
Mr. Sunday.
I don't know if Councilman Engberg was referring to my comments as being flippant. They weren't intended to be that way. If you did mean me, I could turn that right around on the other viewpoint and say, perhaps that viewpoint is being flippant towards the needs of our children. So that works both ways, and it's a double-edged sword. I don't think we need those kind of comments towards each other when we're discussing these important issues. That's all I have.
Mr. Jaworski.
Here's another thing that people aren't really thinking about here is nobody really knows what this does to you. What's it going to do to you 10 years from now? So for me, to protect our children right now is far more important than saying you don't have to wear a mask till you're 10 o'clock or 10 years old, excuse me. We don't know what's happening. We don't know the side effects. I have a very good friend that was in the hospital. He was on the ventilator for 11 days. That was back April, I believe. He still doesn't have any stamina. He gets tired at a snap of a finger. Well, do we want to do that to our children too? If they get it at 5, 6 years old, and then at 10 years old, they start having health problems because of what they got when they were 5 or 6 years old. I think it's important. None of us like wearing these masks. I don't like wearing this mask. You have to. It's for the respect of other people. I just say we got to leave it where it's at also because there's just too much unknown here. Thanks.
Mr. Ingberg.
I just wanted to clarify, I wasn't directing any comment at any one person. I just want to make sure that we're cognizant of not treating one group of people over another group of people differently, and make sure we take it seriously from top to bottom, whether you're 5 or you're 65.
Thank you. Any other discussion? If not, please vote. And we just, again, to clarity, because of the different substitutes, we're voting on the motion to raise it to 10. A yes vote would raise it, a no vote would not.
One yay, 7 nays by Jaworski, Klug, Stube, Engberg, Mumgarde, Gaines, and Glover.
Motion fails. Next would be a motion to amend to create an additional exception to the mask mandate for those who have been diagnosed with COVID-19 and recovered, or who have received a government-approved COVID vaccine. Is there a motion? Motion by Sunday? Oh, was that a second, Mr. Mumgarde? Okay. Discussion.
Mayor Black, if the true intent of this is not control over our citizenry, if the true intent is just to protect the public, then you should all wholeheartedly accept this proposed amendment, because those who have become, now I'm not talking about people who were asymptomatic, because it's questionable whether they've developed adequate antibodies. But if someone has become ill with the COVID-19 virus and then has been so diagnosed with the COVID-19 virus and is then 14 days post-recovery, it's a very safe assumption that that person has now developed antibodies to this disease that will last, we now know from the most recent studies, years, if not decades. The 3 months is a fallacy. That was the government's line for a while, but the latest studies show years, if not decades. And they can figure that out by the rate of diminishment of the antibodies that they watch them from month to month over time, and people that are known to be carrying antibodies. And these are the findings, most recent findings of the scientists, as I understand them to be. Secondly, if somebody has already received a government-approved COVID-19 vaccine for the full recommended course of that vaccine, and 14 days have passed since that time, it should be safe to assume that that person now has antibodies developed And there should be no reason why that person should be required to wear a mask either. Now, maybe they might choose to so as to not offend somebody, but you know what? This is America. And either we have freedom in this country or we don't. If the real reason is to protect the public, then there should be no reason that what I'm proposing is not added as an exception here. Otherwise, it's just a fallacy and it's a control thing. So my colleagues, you can decide what you want this to be, but I would urge you to accept number 8 as an additional exception.
Mr. Gaines. Bear with me 1 second. There you go.
Okay, I have 2 questions for Mrs. Schramm, if she's available. So by no means am I have any medical training, so I'm asking these questions based off of just elementary reading, but is it true that people that are vaccinated with the flu vaccine, just as an example, can still get the flu and possibly spread it to other people, regardless of the fact that they don't have severe symptoms because they've been vaccinated?
That is correct. A seasonal flu vaccine, you're still eligible. You are still able to be infected with the seasonal flu. Correct.
So would that be the same in your understandings with the antibodies, that if somebody had the antibodies, they could still get the COVID virus inside of their body, not have bad symptoms, but still be able to spread the disease?
I think the important thing to remember with COVID is that it's a novel illness. So we are continually building the science, particularly around the vaccine. We do know that, or actually Dr. Bricks on a White House briefing recently mentioned that they are anticipating that after that first dose, we should have some level of immunity, but how much immunity comes with that first initial dose is really unsure at this point in time. And as the FDA has all of the scientific data, that will become public once they move through that emergency use authorization. So there's still a lot of information, from my personal opinion, that I want to dig into in regards to both the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine.
Okay, thank you very much. And if I can just add a final comment, because I hope that if this mask mandate passes tonight, that it's long gone before we're to the point of mass vaccination. So I'm not going to support this amendment, but that's just my stand.
Mr. Glover.
Yes, I won't support this amendment either, for the simple reason that I think it's too early to talk about something like that. I think at some point, if we get down the line and things start going the other way, and we have to either meet again and talk about extending the mask, at that point, if there's a lot of people that have had the shot, and there's some way to identify it besides stamping it on your forehead, I might be in favor of something like that, but at this point, I couldn't vote for it.
Mr. Mumgarde.
Well, I'm not going to vote for this either. Number one, I think it's totally unworkable. There's just, I mean, we're going to have people wandering around with all sorts of exceptions, and adding one more like this, and particularly an exception that really is very difficult to ascertain whether that's accurate or not when somebody claims to be a survivor. Secondly, I'm a COVID survivor. I had it. You all know it because I missed meetings. Well, so this would give me the benefit of being able to walk around without a mask. As Mr. Sunday points out, well, I can voluntarily walk around with a mask, and I will do that. I've been asked why I do that, since I may or may not be unable to infect people. Well, it's because I respect the people who I'm walking around. And we've heard testimony about how if you're walking around without a mask, that creates apparently fear and apprehension in people that leads to bullying. I see no reason to add another situation where that could occur, especially when it's a completely unworkable exception to an overall demand. It's not about control. It's about simply being a respectful person. And so I'm not going to vote for this.
Mr. Jaworski.
again, I'm going to go back to there's a lot of unknowns here with this disease. Some things that I've heard, when we do get the vaccines, they're only going to last up to 8 months. Don't know if that's true or not. But another thing to say that once you have this, you won't get it again. Everybody knows who Nick Saban is at Alabama. This second time he's had COVID within the last 2 months, I think it is. So you can get it again. So there's no way I'm supporting this either. Thank you.
Mr. Ingberg.
Well, I won't support it because number one, there's not enough evidence or information yet that would tell a person that you absolutely 100% will not get this back once you have it. Second of all, as Mr. Mumgard said, it's just as much about respecting the safety of others as well. And finally, and Mr. Glover, I think, was kind of getting at too, is I don't know how in the heck you can manage this. Who has it, who isn't had it, who's had it, but maybe doesn't have a high enough level of antibodies, whatever. I think it's just going to be really a nightmare to manage.
Mr. Sunday.
I think Councilman Ingberg just hit this whole ordinance hit the nail right on the head. It's unmanageable to prosecute these cases. And it's a travesty that we're even going to try, because it's not just the exception that I'm proposing that creates a hornet's nest of problems for anybody that chooses to charge and then prosecute this particular thing. What about the health exceptions? Because I think a lot of people do have legitimate health exceptions, and I know some of those people are here in the audience right now, and I know at least one of them personally, and it's legitimate. But there are those also that would probably take advantage of that exception and just claim to have a health problem. And how is a prosecutor going to deal with that? Carla, do you have any thoughts on that?
That is a very good point on this, and it's a concern that that I have had with the particular exception for medical and mental health that's already in there. Now, I'm going to be very clear. I think we have a big problem with the ordinance if we take out the mental health and the medical exception, because I think that that's based on some other case law. I think that that is a restriction or is an exception that we need to have in here. One of the difficulties with prosecuting, if somebody is cited and they come and they say, well, I fall under the exception because I have a medical condition or I have a mental health condition, or if I've already had COVID or I have the vaccine, if that amendment would pass as well, it would be the same situation. I have two options. My first option is to take them at face value and dismiss.
Yeah, I wasn't giving up my spot. I just. Sure. Certainly. And I wanted to address something that was brought up about Nick Saban. Councilman Jaworski said that he's had this twice. That's not true. He had a false positive test the first time, and then a couple months later, he actually got the virus. He has not had it twice. And I've looked into this, and it's less than 0.5% of the people that get COVID have gotten it again. Less than 0.5%. If you think that's too high of a risk, and you think that necessitates taking away people's freedom and autonomy, then you don't respect people's freedom and autonomy. Councilman Mumgard just told us that we have to respect other people. I do respect other people. How about also respecting their freedom and their rights? How about that?
Please, no clapping.
I guess I got lost a little bit. Okay. As I said, I think this is unworkable. Mr. Sunday may have a point there that enforcing the whole ordinance will at times be difficult, but you don't make it worse by putting something like this in. And I also was a prosecutor, and I can answer that question. Yeah, if somebody who has a medical condition and can't wear a mask gets a ticket, well, they take it in and it gets dismissed. they can prove they had a medical condition, the charges are declined or dismissed. It's very simple. So this just, and how would you then prove, well, I had COVID? You can't do that. So you don't make things worse by adding something like this in there.
Any other discussion? Please vote. Yeah, good point. So we'll clarify. So a yes vote would add the exception that if you've been diagnosed or you've had the vaccine, that you're exempt. A yes vote would do that. A no vote would not put that in and leave it as it is.
One yea, 7 nays by Jaworski, Klug, Stube, Ingberg, Mumgarde, Gaines, and Glover.
Motion fails. Next is a motion to amend the sunset provision to provide that the expiration and termination of requirements imposed by the ordinance shall correlate to the yellow tier of the state of Nebraska directed health measures color phases. Percentage of COVID-19 patients occupying staffed hospital beds drops below 20% based on a 14-day rolling average. Is there a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Councilman Sunday. Is there a second? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Stube. Second, second by Councilman Glover. Discussion. Mr. Stube.
Yeah, so I'm the one that kind of talked a little bit with Amber about this relative to the sunset clause that's in the ordinance. And to me, picking a date is somewhat arbitrary, especially when we start looking at all the restrictions that are in place that have been identified by the governor. And it's based off of essentially the number of COVID patients that are occupying beds in hospitals. So I think it really should be tied to something that is recognizable to everybody. It's put out by the governor. And I think if we look at it from the perspective of a reduction in that particular parameter, I think it would be more acceptable to me to include that versus just an arbitrary date of February 23rd.
Mr. Glover.
So how would we do that? So it drops to a certain level, and at what point do we meet and then say it's at this level and we no longer have it? How
My
does that
understanding
work?
of the motion, but I'll ask Mr. Stube to clarify if it's his intent, is because that color chart is part of an actual directed health measure of the governor, it's an official measure we can use. And so when the governor moves to red or yellow, it would imply we have a mask mandate. If it moves below yellow, then it would, without any action of the council, would remove the mask mandate. I believe that's the intent, is it?
So if that's the intent, how do we get the information out to people then? How does somebody that don't watch TV very often, doesn't listen to the news very often, how would we get that out to people?
As far as the color?
Yeah, well, as far as the mask, so it gets to a certain color, we don't wear it. But how are we gonna let people in our city know that?
The color of the directive health measure itself is controlled by the governor and the Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services. So they do all their normal communication to people that they've been doing. Specific to us, it would be dependent on us to use our communication channels and the Sarpy County Cass Health and that to get the word out. And I think we have that issue whether we use a date or this. Either way, what's our mandate? Who's under it? When's it alive? When's it not alive? That's a very good point.
Right, and that's the reason I asked the question, because if it's going to fluctuate, which I'm in favor of, tying it to something that gives people hope as we go down the line, I want to make sure there's some way of letting people know, because I think it could be a big bumble if we just say, watch the news or watch the graphs when the governor speaks. Thank you.
One point of clarification, and just make sure it is your intent. The way it's written and the way the administration believes is if we fall below yellow and the mask mandate goes away and then we come back to yellow, it does not automatically put it back in. We would have to visit that the way it's currently written. I don't know if that's your intent, but clarify what your intent.
Yeah, so I had a long conversation with Amber about this, and obviously it is my intent and that when the directive health measures that are in place today by the governor. It's something, when I open the paper every day, I see COVID, above the fold on the front page of the newspaper. We hear about it continuously, whether it's through, the internet or whether it's through the local news medias or whatever. It is something that we can get. And if we want to know, we can click on it every day and go to the governor's website. But obviously, I understand where Mr. Glove is coming from a perspective of letting the public know. And that's something that I wanted to make sure that when I discussed with Amber, I said, I want staff to have something that's easily accessible, easily to interpret, so that we can, as a city, we can get the message out that we've moved away from a mask mandate. And I think this particular information is readily available to the public. And yes, my intent would be is that once we reach that level, the mask mandate goes off, I think the council should then revisit and talk about if we believe that another mandate needs to be implemented.
And that is the way we believe it's written. So we'll go with that intent. Any other discussion? Mr. Mumgarde?
Well, I guess I have a question for purposes of consistency. How does this fit with what Omaha, Ralston, and Gretna has done?
They all went with date specific.
Omaha has a date specific?
Yeah. And I think they're all looking towards the end of February. I don't know if they're using the exact date, but February 23rd runs in my mind.
Okay, I think it can work either way, so I'll go with it.
Ralston is not date specific. The others are, we believe.
Yeah, Mayor, if I could just add, I think obviously the Omaha area is the first one that, and their date changed too. I mean, initially they did it and then they had another council hearing and they extended it again. And I think a lot of the communities in this particular area looked at date specific. To me, it's just an arbitrary date. It has nothing to do with regard to what the health professionals are looking at on a regular basis. And that's why I believe it should really be tied to that, not date specific.
We did have it in the staff report, but just to remind, Omaha's is sunsets on February 23rd. Gretna takes effect November 25th, sunsets February 23rd, same as Omaha. La Vista is in effect November 27th, sunsets February 23rd, same as Omaha. Ralston is in effect November 25th, and it remains in effect until it's rescinded by the city or a directive health measure. So no date on Ralston. Any other discussion? If not, please vote. Say that again. Voting on the amendment, and a yes vote would replace the date specific with the color chart. A no vote would leave date specific.
8 yeas, 0 nays.
Motion passes. Next one. Remove the motion to amend section 1 of ordinance 1911 to remove section 125-23 severability clause. You want to withdraw that? Okay, so there is no motion. Then the last one, motion to amend ordinance 1911 to enact an emergency clause. And just for public and council, let me explain this one real quick. When an ordinance is passed, the general practice is it takes 15 days after council approval for that ordinance to become effective. State law does give the right to put in an emergency clause, which waives the 15-day waiting period. The motion to amend to add the emergency clause is a simple majority. However, if the emergency clause is added, that ordinance, the final ordinance you vote on that has the emergency clause must be passed with a supermajority. Is that a right interpretation? Does that make sense? Okay, so the motion to amend ordinance 1911 to enact an emergency clause. Is there a motion? And this was a recommendation of the Board of Health. Motion by Councilman Gaines, second by Councilman Glover. Discussion. Please vote.
Seven yeas, 1 nay by Sunday.
Motion passes. I don't have any other prepared motions to amend. Let the council see if there's any others that come forward. Seeing none, then the original motion is amended. Let me just recap real quick what the amendments are so we know what's on the floor to discuss then. So the original motion that you had will strike 125.11A6, where it talked about the spread and treatment of COVID-19 has caused a serious and dangerous shortage of medical beds. That is struck. 7 following that has the words "a public nuisance" and struck. The next motion replace date specific with the color chart of the governor's directive health measure. So if we go below yellow, the mask mandate sunsets, and it does have an emergency clause to be effective upon passing. So that's the motion as amended. Any council discussion on the main motion? Ms. Klug.
Yeah, I feel it should be talked about just a bit is that I think all of us as council members have paid attention. We've all, we've listened to what people have said on both sides. We've received phone calls, we've had text messages, emails. I've even been stopped repeatedly when I've ran to the grocery store. What should have taken 1 hour was a 3-hour grocery shopping experience for me. And that's good. I like to hear that people are speaking up, that they're paying attention, and it is good. And some of us have also followed up with our reading. We've watched the videos, we've heard what you've seen. And what it's proven to me is this is a topic with great emotion, with a lot of articles on both sides, a lot of studies on both sides. And what it's really pointed out to me is that there's a lot of science and it seems to be changing consistently. Like Councilman Sunday said earlier, what was said at the beginning of this is not true anymore. It is changing. So I'm kind of left with, so what do we do now? Because we are seeing so much change and we've got positives, negatives, we've got masks, no masks. What do we do? The one thing that we all know is that people are dying of this. So we need to do the things that we need to do. We need to wash our hands. We need to use our sanitizer. We need to do our social distancing. And some of those things are for ourselves, but it's also for the other people. And what I'm really hearing and seeing a lot from many people on both sides is we need to care for each other. We need to make sure what we're doing. When people are saying they're wearing their mask, it's not because I'm protecting myself. It's because I realize I could spread it to somebody else. Now, I know it's important to remember that the COVID virus is extremely small, and maybe these masks don't catch that virus. But what I did learn and read repeatedly in many, many of the studies is that the virus is holding on to the moisture that we breathe in and out regularly, that it is hanging on what is leaving our mouths as we speak. And the masks are making a difference in catching that moisture, hence reducing what's leaving our immediate space, protecting the other people. Is it perfect? No, but little in this world is actually perfect. Rather, I think what we need to do is figure out how do we show respect for each other, to care more for the person sitting next to us through the glass behind the mask, to make sure that we are showing the respect to our fellow human beings. So will the masks actually stop it quickly? Possibly, but it's kind of an unknown. Will the masks help to save lives? Most likely. They're catching the moisture that the COVID is riding on. So we need to remember that this isn't about ourselves. It's about doing what we can to help everybody in our communities. That's where my vote had to come down to, is am I thinking about myself or am I thinking about others? I had to come down to what were my constituents saying to me. And while there was testimony and thoughts and emails and texts and everything on both sides, it really did come down to more people were asking me to vote for the mask mandate than against it. And it is a way of showing respect for other fellow human beings. One final thought. We're told to keep our mouths shut in a movie theater and not yell out fire. That's not for our own personal safety. It's for the other people's safety so that they don't try to escape. I kind of view this mask mandate at the same time, or the same way. I don't wear my mask for my protection, but rather to protect the other people that I may be around. Thank you.
Mr. Stubbe.
Thank you, Mayor. I believe that all of the elected officials in this room take public safety seriously when we make decisions. And we've heard a lot about control. We've heard a lot about individual rights. And I'm a strong believer in individual rights. I'm a strong believer in personal responsibility, but government also has a responsibility, and we have the authority to look out for the public welfare when it comes to health and safety. We are dealing with something that is easily spreadable. You can't see it. It affects people in many different ways. We have examples sitting across from me that 2 individuals that have COVID and have obviously are now healthy, hopefully. But I've had individuals that are in their 40s that have died from it. I've had individuals in their 50s that have been laid up for weeks. So I think it's very important for us to be able to consider everything that's been done to date from the standpoint of businesses and the school district and the health systems. They've all taken the initiative to implement measures that are very, very important, not only to the health of their employees, but to the people that come into contact with them. And I think it's the government's right and responsibility to step up and support those entities that have all done things for their employees and for people that come into contact. So I plan to support this mask mandate.
Mr. Gaines.
So throughout this process, I've had a lot of conversations with many of my constituents, many people via email, over the phone. And I just wanted to reach out and thank those people for being respectful, for being courteous. I had cordial conversations with them, even though we differed in opinion. But, you know, throughout all this testimony, I heard about all the things that Americans are. And I think that that is one of the things that Americans truly are, is we're able to debate, we're able to have differences of opinion and not persecute each other. You know, I got several emails today that were contrary to that type of behavior. And, you know, I just want to point out, I haven't made my decision based off of pressure from anybody, not pressure from my constituents, not pressure from the people on the other side. I've not spoken to any healthcare system, as many people, you know, were saying that UNMC was pressuring us, or different people. I made my decision after listening to testimony of each and every one of the people that were up here for in excess of 5 hours, for writing countless pages of responses to emails, not being argumentative with people, wanting people to tell me why I was wrong, to give me facts, to give me places to go to do research. And I just want everybody to be assured that, you know, and I told a few people that I would not make a decision until I took into consideration everybody's testimony. And that was the reason last night why I did not vote to waive the 3rd reading, because I wanted to sleep on it. I had a lean in one direction, but I honestly wanted to spend the night thinking about it. And late last night or early this morning, I made my decision. You know, with that being said, one of the biggest things that I looked at on this, and I'm not going to share my total opinion. I'm not a constitutional scholar by any means, not even a lawyer. But for that matter, if you just do a little bit of history, this isn't the first time in America that we've had health mandates. There are Supreme Court cases going back to 1905 that address this issue. There's a Supreme Court case that went up within the last 3 to 6 weeks that addressed the 1905 decision. Mask mandates. This isn't the first time we've had mask mandates in America. And after those mask mandates, they went away. We found cures for diseases. We found vaccines for diseases. This is not something, I don't like wearing this mask. I looked at Councilwoman Klug earlier and I wanted to smile at her. I couldn't smile at her. Children aren't the only people affected by this. Every single person that's wearing a mask is affected by it. So, you know, you know, the contagion mitigation efforts have been around forever, and that's what this is about. This is a temporary measure to protect people that are in a position that they may be more susceptible to death, serious illness, hospitalization, because we don't know. And I'll be the first person to tell you that when this pandemic started, it was filled with fear mongering, with false information, with so many things that were the way that they are back in March, and we thought we'd be over this in 2 weeks and then 6 weeks, and now here we are in December. So I think we need to let this process play out. We need to cover our faces for, if it's a few more months, it's a few more months, because the data that I look at after talking to numerous firefighters, police officers, nurses, doctors, the data that I understand is that this is an airborne illness that possibly can be caught in this mask, that what can't be caught, it's a smaller viral load. And the data suggests that the smaller the viral load, the less severe the infection. I don't know if that's true. I'm not a doctor. All I can do is take the data that's available to me and make the best decision possible. So, and one of the final things I want to point out is there were several people that said that, it's not your job to take care of my health. I understand that, they're correct. But it is my job to protect somebody else from possibly being infected because somebody doesn't wear a mask. Now, again, I'm not a doctor. I'm not telling you can or can't get infected with or without a mask. I'm just telling you what the data suggests. And so it's my responsibility, my duty to the people that I report to, which are the people that elected me and the people that I represent, to take the data and make a responsible vote. And that's why at this point in time, I'm going to support this mandate.
Mr. Mumgarden.
I'm going to echo some of the things I've heard from other council members. First off, this is, I've been on the council a long time, and I can tell you this has been one of the most productive exercises we've had. The involvement of people in discussing this, pro and con, has been wonderful. It really means something to me to see people who participate in government, and regardless of whether we come out with a decision that you like or you don't like, thank you very much. That was, your participation has been valuable. I'm going to agree. I'll start with the idea that mask mandates violate someone's constitutional right. As it has been pointed out, that's a desire for liberty that just cannot exist. I spent 34 years as a trial attorney specializes in defending lawsuits that allege constitutional violations. And I learned a long time ago that constitutional rights are not absolute. They all have conditions. And as Mr. Gaines has pointed out, as early as 1905, the Supreme Court upheld a mandatory vaccination law. And they said something that means something to me. It said that real liberty could not exist if an individual person could act as they wish, regardless of the injury it causes to another. That's the limitation and the condition on liberty. That's also the situation that I think we find with COVID and masks. And I understand why courts have found that this is a reasonable, neutral, and generally applicable face covering regulation. I find that, and that's within the power of government to protect public health. I find that's all we're doing here, and it's a legitimate exercise of government power. Now, I certainly understand, and we've heard a lot of disagreement on whether masks actually protect anybody or do the job, but I find disagreement such as that really isn't unusual in the sciences, medical sciences or otherwise. So all that I can do is go with the medical consensus, which says that masks make a difference. I mean, I have to go with what I know people know more than I do, and that's the medical consensus. Now, I'll tell you that what really has bothered me about this ordinance from the very beginning was whether it's going to be productive. I'm in favor. I don't think we ought to pass laws that are not going to achieve something. And I looked at it and I said, well, come on, this is only going to apply in the 6.5 square miles of Papillion, and most of which is houses and open space where the ordinance won't apply. So what's the purpose? We really, in my view, ought to have, if we're going to have mask mandates, it ought to be at least countywide, if not statewide, because of this, was pointed out yesterday, the intermixing of people in this area, it does not depend upon city limits. But that would only happen if our state officials would let it happen, and they won't. So we're stuck with that position of scrambling to see what we can achieve in the metro area, which is the best we can come up with. And I think the World Herald said it correctly when it editorialized on that point a few days ago, when it said that the state's denial of a broader mandate creates a nonsensical patchwork of mandates. To some extent, that's what's happening here. But I see that the need is there, and if the state isn't going to respond, we have to do the best we can with what we have, and that is city ordinance. Now, I realize that the vast majority of people out there are wearing masks simply out of respect for others or trying to keep their own safety. So I was intrigued by the idea of, well, what's the purpose of why are we doing that? Well, of course, there are other peoples who don't have that respect and who are not doing that for various reasons. So one aim of any ordinance that regulates conduct is to lead people to make better decisions. Achieving that aim, I think, is alone sufficient to justify this ordinance. So given all that, I'm going to vote for the ordinance with any good luck, with any turn of events. We will come to the end of February and this will be gone. And this will be a discussion that can then live in history.
Mr. Jaworski.
Yeah, I'm going to support this. And the reason why basically is it's for the nurses, the doctors, the first responders, all those people that deal with this daily. We don't deal with this daily. We just got to come up with things like this. I don't like wearing this mask, but I do wear it because I respect her. I respect these guys over here. We need to somehow slow this down. Is this going to work? Who knows? But before I left tonight, I was watching the news and there was a doctor on and said, by wearing a mask, if the stuff does come out, it's going to come out far less than it would if you didn't have a mask. It'll travel 4 to 6 feet if you didn't have a mask. If it does get out, it's going to come out and come straight down. So for me, it's pretty simple. And it's for the nurses, the doctors, the first responders. If we can help them, give them a break where they're overworked, they're tired, they need some help. If this can help, let's give it a shot. And hopefully this only lasts for a month or two. That's my goal. I'd be happy as heck to take this dumb thing off and not wear it. But right now you can't. So I am going to support this. And I think it's a good move forward. Thanks.
I guess one good thing about being later on speaking, there's not much left to say. Okay. But I will say that none of us around this table take any particular joy in doing a mask mandate. However, we're a little bit a victim of our circumstances and the fact that we have a virus we're dealing with, that there's so many unknowns, that information has changed daily, it seems like, since it came to our shores. But I want to thank everybody, as everybody else has, but I want to also that took the time to come up and testify, whether it was Tuesday night or last night, and people that took the time to email, to call, and all those things. And I also want to commend the council and the city, though, too, because rather than hide something, push something through, try to do something in one day, we went beyond that, and I'm glad we did. And where we had, rather than one required public hearing, we had two. We did it so we'd have the capability to allow more people to speak, and try to make it as convenient as we can. That's difficult when we have to have occupancy restrictions in this room, but try we did. And I appreciate all the testimony. You know, it's not a matter of taking sides in this, whether you are against masks or for masks. I think you have to remember the human element involved, and that is the fact that um, nobody wants to, as we've heard, take anybody's rights away. But, you know, when we hear that we have no responsibility to for the safety of others, that they have a right to get sick, they have a right to have the virus. We should be involved in that. Well, folks, you know, in the 20 years I was in the police business, there were times when, for safety reasons, certain measures were put in place. Whether you want to look at speeding laws, where you want to look at other things that we do, or what's changed over the years, you try to do it in order, you hope, to make things safer for people. So we do have that responsibility. And I think if we turned our back and walked away from this, we're shirking that responsibility. You know, the other thing is too, we all of us around this table have kind of a strange responsibility in the fact that each one of us, I think Mr. Gaines said this earlier, we're responsible for the people in our ward that voted for us. We're not here to reflect our personal view. We're here to represent them. But in addition to that, the people in our own ward that we try to represent what they want, we also have to look at the community as a whole. We have to realize there's other people in Ward 1, Ward 2, Ward 3, Ward 4, and we have to represent those folks. And I will tell you that I've heard from all wards, and the approach to mask wearing is more positive than negative. And I think it's because people aren't looking to take anything away. I think people generally in Papillion are good people. They want to do what they feel is best to help their neighbor, to help their own family, to help those they don't even know. I think that it's a matter of not right as much as doing the right thing to try to help. Other people have said, well, will this work? There's not a guarantee. But you know, to me, I think it's worth an inconvenience. I hate wearing this thing. I hate sitting here speaking with it. But on the other hand, to me, if I look at it, it's really an inconvenience for everyone. But you know, if it's going to protect my neighbor, if it's going to protect a fellow council person that's at risk, if it's going to protect people out there sitting in the audience, if I speak to them after this meeting, then I think it's well worth it. Any life that we can make better, we should try to do so. So I'm going to support this, and I don't expect, I hope it doesn't last long. I appreciate Mr. Stubbe's contribution by having a more realistic way to determine when mask wearing is not necessary, rather than a date certain that's just made out of whole cloth. So I appreciate him doing that. I think that makes a lot of common sense. So all I'll do is ask everyone here, whether you agree with what we vote on tonight or how we vote or not, please try to remember it's temporary. Please try to remember no one around this table is looking to, we did this, now we can do that. I want to keep businesses open. I hate, and I would have a difficult time supporting closing down businesses, because that's livelihood and that's what people need to do to survive. But this, to me, is a inconvenience, if you will, for now. And I appreciate everybody's help in complying and doing what we can. One last thing that nobody's mentioned too is we heard several times during testimony that we're putting the police in a bad situation. And are we going to occupy all their time enforcing this? Yes, it's difficult to talk about enforcement. these kinds of things are difficult to enforce. But I will tell you, and I'm not going to speak for Chief Lyons, but I will tell you that police operate even more so today than maybe many years ago with a sense of priority. If their personnel is tied up on domestic assaults or burglaries or things more of a serious nature, they're not going to drop everything and speed to someplace because somebody reported someone violating and not wearing a mask. I expect what they'll probably do is respond if it doesn't interfere with the course of high priority calls. And I don't know, but I would assume that depending on the circumstances, they will use their best judgment on how to deal with it, as it should be. So I'm going to support this, and I appreciate everybody's time and cooperation as we've gone through this process.
Mr. Sunday, you got the floor, and then just a reminder, I did interrupt you too earlier, so if that's still a valid conversation, that'd be the time this would be appropriate.
Which conversation was that? Oh, thank you. Yeah, most people might not know this. I'm a prosecutor. Also, I'm a deputy county attorney in Cass County. I prosecute crimes, and I've been doing that for over 20 years now, which is hard for me to believe, but it's true. I see, as a prosecutor, I see a lot of problems with this in terms of putting together a successful case for prosecution, especially when there's some exceptions in play. And I also don't think, honestly, that the ordinance has much teeth, even if you could prosecute it successfully, because the fine is only $25. So I think it's more of a symbolic, my own view, it's more of a symbolic insult to the citizens of this community that is saying to them, your voluntary compliance, which has been probably well over 99% throughout this pandemic, is not good enough. And now we, the wise city council, are going to hand down this edict that you must do it or else. That's what I feel it says to the people of this community. And I've heard a lot of people here on this board, including myself, brag up our city because we're a growing, forward-thinking city, and yet we still have that small town feel here. But this doesn't feel like home to me when my government tells me what I must do. I must wear this, as the man said the other day, this diaper over my face. I don't mind wearing the mask, honestly, when I go out in public. I did wear the mask every day, and I got this disease anyway. And I thank the Lord that I recovered from it. And it's not pleasant, trust me, but it's not fatal even close to every time. In fact, I've done the math from Sarpy County, and because we're talking about Sarpy County, I don't care what the man said the other day about 94% survival. That's not accurate for Sarpy County. The latest numbers, and I pulled them from today's Sarpy County dashboard, there have been 11,084 recovered cases. That's people that have had it and recovered, and there have been 62 deaths. Now, 62 is a lot of deaths. I'll give you that. But when you consider that out of the 11,084 that have recovered, so the numerator is 62, and you divide that by 11,084 plus 62, and you come up with 99.44% survival rate in Sarpy County, and that includes all the 80 and 90-year-olds too. That's everybody. That's the survival rate. So let's not over-exaggerate, just like was over-exaggerated to us last week at the safety committee meeting. Ms. Schramm, you're a really nice lady, but I think you exaggerated. You told us that we were critically short of hospital beds. You told us that in less than 7 days, we were going to be in the red phase of the danger zone. And here we are more than 10 days later, and we're still in the orange phase, and the numbers are dropping. So I don't mind open and honest debate. I don't like being misled. And I feel like the safety committee was misled. I think the health board was misled. And I think this council's been misled about the extent of this. I'm not saying it's not a serious problem. Obviously it is. And we all want the same thing. We all want this thing to go away. But, and I know I held up those graphs the other day, Sarpy County new cases graph throughout the whole pandemic, right up against the Douglas County graph. Douglas County had the mandatory mask mandate, Sarpy County didn't, and the graphs were identical, virtually identical. So our citizens are doing a good job. It's not our citizens' fault. And I am going to vote against this because I am not going to blame our citizen. It doesn't feel like home. I know this is going to pass 7-1, and to me, that doesn't feel like home, and that doesn't give me a small town feel. That feels like oppressive, overreaching government to me. It feels like tyranny, and it feels like subjugation. That's what it feels like to me. And when this passes, I'm going to have to admit that I'm going to be ashamed. Thank you.
Any other council discussion? Seeing none, please vote.
Seven yeas, one nay by Sunday.
Motion passes. Do we have a motion to adjourn? Motion by Councilman Glover. Second by Councilman Gaines. Please vote.
8 yeas, 0 nays.
We are adjourned.